consider Venezuela to be not a very friendly country?
This is quite an extraordinary conflict to follow, particularly from this side of the Atlantic, when we're sort of rather hoping that President Trump and the Americans be rather more focused on Ukraine. But as we're beginning to learn from President Trump, what is close to the U.S. mainland gets his undivided attention and focus. And Venezuela has been a real thorn in the U.S. side for some time. And when Trump's first term in office, he logged horns with Maduro and has done ever since. And I think the view around the world is that this is a autocratic regime, and Maduro is a dictator, much in the same guise as Putin, who incidentally happens to be one of these places allies. And it would appear that he is undemocratically in his position. There have been various elections where he has lost, but he's refused to relinquish power. The big issue, I think, for the US, quite apart from Trump and the US see him as a potential adversary, the other side of the Caribbean, is also the drugs trade. And President Trump is very clear that he believes Maduro is front and center to that drugs trade, which is swamping the US with drugs, which is a massive issue for the Americans. And Trump has been very clear that he wants to stop that. In recent months, we have seen the US military attack a number of drug dealers' boats and destroy them with drugs on their way to the US. This has sort of increased the sort of rhetoric, and significant amounts of US military hardware, aircraft carriers and ships are being positioned where they could have an impact on Venezuela. And that force seems to be building up. And even over the weekend, President Trump put out on his social media that the airspace is closed around Venezuela. No aircraft should enter it, with the insinuation that the US was potentially about to attack. So the stakes are pretty high. I bet they're a lot higher the other side of the Atlantic. But Trump seems to, I think this is perhaps a conflict and a war that Trump thinks he can probably win fairly easily with American might, and is really turning the screw on Venezuela, and has already deported a lot of Venezuelans back from the US. So very big issue on the other side of the Atlantic, certainly. The Venezuelans, have a capable military. I mean, in no way, no match for the US at all. On paper, it's sort of 10 as to 1. And we know that the US military is the most technically sophisticated and capable on the planet, bar none, bar, a long, long way. So I think there's no doubt that the US could really do serious damage to Venezuela. But they are claiming that they will defend themselves. Having said that, one would expect the US to nullify that pretty quickly. Maduro is threatening. He says he can put 4 million people into the field, the Bolivian militia, I think he calls it, which again, I think this is probably dictatorship bravado rather than anything firm, because from what we're understanding, and it's very difficult to get the truth on these things, that majority of people in Venezuela do not support him anyway. I think the flashpoints come where you just have to look at some of Maduro's allies, Russia and some of the other South American countries that may well wade in to support him. I don't think there's a lot of sympathy for Maduro from the democratic world, the West, as it were, and certainly the drugs emanating from Venezuela and other South American countries are not just a scourge to the US, but a scourge to us here in the UK and Europe. But when you have conflict like this, and we just see what's happening in Europe with Ukraine, of course it can spill over, and of course it can accelerate. And the fact that the Americans are so focused on this and already attacked some Venezuelan boats in the Caribbean, which there's lots of questions about the legality to this. It's pretty clear that Trump sort of feels that whatever he does to Venezuela is in support of a secure U.S. mainland. So I think this is something that needs to be watched very closely, and in conjunction with what's happening, in Ukraine, Russia, and Europe at the moment. The global tension is really pretty high. I mean, we've discussed before what's happening in Europe with Ukraine, the highest tension since the end of the Second World War. You throw in another potentially devastating conflict in South America between Venezuela and the US, and this starts to become a global conflict rather than isolated regional ones. So I think there is a lot of nervousness around, and when you have people like Trump and Putin pulling the strings, that nervousness is sort of exacerbated.